Good morning, everyone. I'm Regan. I am the MAR Talks and MAR Shift program coordinator, and I am a social work student at the University of Victoria. And welcome to MAR Talks. So, MAR is thrilled to welcome Valerie Jerome this February for an inspiring conversation that goes beyond athletic success, but to also center belonging, allyship, and the lived experiences of navigating Canadian sport as a Black athlete. Valerie shares her insights from her experiences growing up in a family of trailblazing Black athletes, sharing reflections from her memoir, Races, the Trial and Triumphs of Canada's Fastest Family, and inviting us to consider both the challenges and triumphs of carving out space together in Canadian sport while navigating a society shaped by racial barriers. Welcome, Valerie, and thank you so much for joining us today. Would you just take a moment to introduce yourself?
What can I say? Well, I was born in 1944 in the city of Winnipeg, actually St. Boniface. My family moved to North Vancouver, 1951. I went through school there. I went to the University of British Columbia. I became a teacher. I was involved in athletics from the age of 14 and very much encouraged by my brother. I enjoyed my teaching career for more than 35 years. I absolutely loved it. I'm the mother of a son who's now in his mid-50s. And I've been very involved in the environmental movement. I ran for the Green Party during the 80s and 90s. I stopped my action there in the year 2000, but I worked on Green Party campaigns in Europe, and I was very involved with the Swedish Greens, as well as trying to get the green message out here in British Columbia. I've been retired since 2001, and since then I've been teaching in Namibia. I've done a lot of birding tours around the world. I love birds. And I'm in touch with hundreds of my former students. It's amazing. I get hundreds of birthday cards every year, and going on holiday with some of my former students this summer. Anyway, many of them are involved in my life, and it was a very rewarding career and important in much of my anti-racism work, in as much as one of my former students has now been elected to Parliament. Wade Grant is the Member of Parliament for Vancouver Quadra, and he and I are each other's favorite persons, and I was able to help him with his campaign. But most importantly, I was able to help him when he was in elementary school, when so much of who we are becomes clear to us when we get a picture of ourselves in the world, in the larger world. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you for sharing that. I read your memoir, and I was absolutely moved by it. So I feel like I know quite a bit about you, but for those who don't, your memoir is really such an inspiring, powerful, and it's very deeply personal memoir. You know, one of the central threads that I found throughout your book was your search for belonging, whether it was in sport or in society or even within your own family. And, you know, thinking about your younger self, how did you experience belonging, and how has that understanding changed over time?
Well, for one thing, I think that most Canadians are not aware of the fact that this country has been so white, very white. It was created, like New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa, to be white English homelands. And so for me, you thought of belonging because, the Chinese were excluded from this country. The indigenous people were all hidden away on reservations. I mean, I lived in North Vancouver. I didn't see an indigenous person over there until I was in grade 12. And this poor guy ended up showing up at a high school sock hop, and the teacher, the principal, phoned the police. You know, they were just hidden away. There was one Chinese man who used to enter North Vancouver, and he would go up and down the lanes in his truck selling vegetables. That was the only color we saw over there. There were laws in Canada brought in 1906 to exclude brown people from being here. And the law was that 100 Black people could immigrate to Canada for the whole country from 1906 forward. 50 people from India and Ceylon, now called Sri Lanka, for the whole country per year. It wasn't until Pierre Trudeau came along and at least made it so that there was family reunification at first, but eventually we opened our doors. So they worked very hard at making this a white country. Our school books were all about white people, and if anyone of color was shown in any of those books, they were as a servant or somebody who was boiling white people in a big pot. We were just not here. So you can hardly say that you belonged when there was never a person, especially when terms like nigger were so pervasive. At Christmas time, the grocery stores brought in these nuts to be sold. It was almonds, walnuts, filberts, and nigger toes. I don't think Canadians even knew that those were called Brazil nuts. Every dispute at school was solved by the teacher or somebody else with eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a nigger by the toe. It was pervasive. It wasn't just somebody trying to call you out. So when we moved to North Vancouver, we were the first white people, non-white people to be there. The Indigenous were hidden on the reserve. The few other Black families who lived in Greater Vancouver lived very close to the train station downtown because those men were employed as porters. At the same time, the law was passed to bring only 100 Black people into this country per year. Mr. Wilfrid Laurier, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, deemed that Black men should be in the position of porters. They couldn't become anything else on our national railways. They couldn't be a conductor, an engineer, a chef, whatever. So it wasn't, there was never a notion of belonging here. So it wasn't as though we were trying to fit in. We didn't see any other examples. I mean, even when television started putting the odd Black person on, maybe they were a comics, sort of fool. Amos and Andy, it wasn't about us having any role. So you didn't see yourself as belonging. So that whole notion of belonging there was no aspiration. My dad really admired Paul Robeson, the great American who was allowed to come to the border to sing. This man was an intellectual. He was an athlete. He was a renowned opera singer, and he was a rarity. Harry Belafonte wasn't in the movies until 1957. So it wasn't like we were aspiring to belong. It would have meant,
Mhm.
bleaching your skin and straightening your hair, which a lot of people like Michael Jackson have done in order to belong.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I really appreciate you just naming it as it was, and that Canada has been and continues to be a very white country. Yeah.
The name Canada is a Huron Iroquois word. It's an Indigenous word. And
Mhm.
yet now to be Canadian, you got to be white. Or else you're a hyphenated Canadian, Indigenous Canadian, Indo-Canadian, African Canadian, who knows? But you're hyphenated, you're semi, you're
Yep.
quasi. So yeah, Canada doesn't necessarily mean white, but that's what we've turned it
Yeah,
into.
for sure. What really stood out to me while reading your story was that you had some people who stepped in, friends, coaches, families, who defended you and trained you and housed you and, ensure had it you needed. How did that type of allyship shape your ability to stay in sport and navigate a society full of racial barriers?
Well, we wouldn't have been in sport if it had not been for people like John Menichello, who was our not only lifelong coach in many respects, but our friend as well. And in the very beginning of the story that I in my book, there's a little girl called Annabelle, and she's going to be in the title of my next book, which is a children's book, Dare to be an Annabelle. That was really remarkable. Here we were surrounded by these hundreds of kids, calling us everything. And this little girl steps forward. She's 7 years old, for God's sake, and stood beside us. I mean, adults don't do that for the most part. They don't. They I just still a close friend. She's very ill in hospital. Well, she's not in hospital. She's in old people's home, and she's got a brain tumor. But it was so. Yes, there were other people that little doing that. But also, when I was in elementary school, there were families who were a little bit more enlightened, in spite of the lightness of their skin, who managed to be very kind. And I do think that the word allyship maybe is getting a bit worn out these days, but I like to think of it as just plain kindness. I think this is something that is too often rare. So yeah, it Annabelle was a person. Nobody on our street spoke to us. That first at our home, the night of the fire. My mother and her 4 kids stood in the street, and the fire engines came, and the people lifted their blinds and looked out at us, and then pulled their blinds down. Nobody offered us a bed, place on their living room floor or anything. And that's a matter of kindness, recognizing another person's humanity. So yes, my coach was one. There were teachers. I don't know that my coach, Grace Walton, who taught at Sutherland Junior High. It was a junior high then. It's a secondary school now. But anyway, I don't know that she was necessarily individually kind to me. She was a very strict woman, but she was the coach of the girls' track team that I was allowed to join. And she wasn't always my best friend. You didn't hear a kind word out of her mouth, but nobody was getting kind words out of her mouth. And by that opportunity, she didn't even know it that she was being the best possible friend to me at that point. So I joined the team and then did very well. And, my brother, he was doing well at North End High. We were then invited to join a track club. So, sometimes when people aren't even aware of their, what you would call allyship, by providing opportunities like sports. And so for my whole teaching career, I sponsored clubs, cross-country teams, track teams, because I thought that was an automatic part of the school life, whereas in fact most teachers disappeared out the door by 3:30, quarter to 4. I was there until 5, probably to the detriment of my own son, who was at daycare. But I do that. That's one way. A lot of kids in high school, I know, don't want to go to school in the morning. But what makes them get up and go is the fact that there's a team practice after school, and they will be cut from the team if they do not show up. And so I wouldn't say that these teachers and coaches are being anti-racist or anything like that. They're providing something that they actually enjoy themselves. They tend to like sports and want to engage in it. So yeah, those people were great. There were other people who also stepped forward in my life, and I had 2 wonderful foster mothers, and they were very kind. They made sure I went to school, and they, one of them used to sew and sew these great clothes for me. It was amazing. It really helped to re-identify myself. So yeah, there were that were good. I would say mainly it was except for of course Miss Walton. She was just strict, but she provided that opportunity, and I'm all for people who coach or provide any type of club after school. It could be chess, could be dance.
Yeah. When you were talking about your 2 of those foster moms that you had, and reading in your book, what kind of came across to me is that some of these acts of allyship weren't so passive. Some of the people, maybe not super enlightened, but a little bit more for the time, were willing to name that racism or support you. And for that type of allyship, like that little girl that you described at the beginning, it seems so rare and powerful. You mentioned that some adults can't even do that. And so when you compare those moments, what really distinguished meaningful allyship versus just like silence or neutrality in your life?
I'll give you an example. This is a chance when I got to be an Annabelle. I was on a bus. It was a Greyhound bus going from Prince Rupert to Prince George across northern British Columbia. And halfway along that trip, the bus stopped. Didn't look like a bus stop to me, but it was. And I looked out the window and I watched this man pay for his fare to get on that half empty bus. So the bus driver jumped back into his seat. This man stepped into the bus and the bus driver said, "You sit on the stairway." I was dumbfounded. And I was dumbfounded mostly by the fact that everybody was sitting there with their mouths closed. So finally, after about 3 or 4 minutes, when I realized nobody else was going to move, I ran up to the front of the bus and I told the bus driver I was going to report him not only to the Greyhound Bus Company, but also in Prince George when we got there, blah, blah, blah. And then sat down and the man was encouraged to take a seat. And about 5 minutes after that, this young woman comes barreling down to the back of the bus to talk to me and she says, I was gonna. I just wanted to poke her. I really did. I was gonna. So the gonna was gonna be there, and I said to her, but I won't be on the next bus. Maybe you will. Maybe next time instead of you. It's hard for people. I guess they're looking at other people, measuring them as they do something that they should do. Not everybody is strong. Some of us have to react out of a necessity. And other people have got what I call kindness. They recognize the dignity and humanity in other people. And that's all I keep doing these talks for. It's not about any special way of being in the world. It's called looking at that person and seeing that they have blood flowing through their veins. They have muscles. They have a heart. They're just like you. And the other night I was coming back from a talk I was giving at the Polygon Center in North Vancouver. I took the C bus across and I walked out onto Cordova Street to wait for the number 50 bus to come and get me. And while I was standing there, this absolutely doped out, poor zombie of a man came up to me and he started screaming at me. You could have heard him for 20 blocks away. He was screaming. So I moved away from him. I was actually terrified, to tell you the truth. And I edged toward a group of people that were standing not that far away. And as I edged toward them, they edged away from me. And I thought, they don't even recognize that I'm a terrified old 82-year-old woman. And for a bus, they worried about, well, God, don't come near us, woman, because we don't want your problems. So, and that had nothing to do with race. It just had to do with this poor man who was doped out of his mind and screaming. I mean, it was terrifying. People's ability to be kind or empathetic, that's not a racial thing. That's kindness,
Yeah.
So anyway, enough of
Yeah.
that.
And given the state of the world, I think that we could use much more kindness. So thank you.
Mm.
Just kind of thinking about that in terms of, we do have a lot of parents who join these conversations. How can parents and, those in caregiving roles, maybe teachers or aunties, grandmas, teach their children to be active allies for kids facing racism, different than that freezing or that neutrality or the I was gonna do something. How can they be active allies?
Well, number one, I do want that I think a lot of parents who are unaware of what they're doing when they're talking and responding about the world outside them. We're all Canadians, for goodness sakes. When Andre DeGrasse wins the 100 meters, they don't call him a Black Canadian. It goes up as Canada. Start treating us all like Canadians as parents instead of saying, oh, that Chinese kid over there. Their great-great-grandparents might have been here in 1873 building the darn railway. Instead, parents act as though because that person's skin is brown, maybe they have almond-shaped eyes, that they should make them something they're not. They don't even speak Chinese. And during recent large numbers of immigrants coming from Hong Kong after 1997 was going to be turned over to mainland China, a lot of people, I would hear them. These were friends of mine. I would be in their cars with their children, and they say, a bad driver goes by. Oh, must be a Chinese driver. Do you know how many times people around here talk about a bad driver? It's automatically A Chinese, well, you're teaching your child something. You have to realize it's just not a sentence that goes out the ether and disappears. It lodges in your children's mind that Chinese people are bad drivers, and that just, I would have to interrupt, say, I'm sorry. That's not necessarily a Chinese. I mean, my friend Fei Wong, her people have been here since the 1800s, for God's sake. But everybody of color is immediately responsible for the troubles that we have, or just in passing making generalizations. And I would like to suggest, in order to have that concern that you be an ally teaching parent, that you look at your remarks. Why isn't Fei Wong? Why do they necessarily? I mean, I don't understand that. Canadian actually means indigenous, Iroquois, Huron. So I'd like to see people the notion that we're all Canadians. People coming from Sweden and Switzerland and France, they're not called Swiss Canadians. So if you want to be somebody that's going to teach your child to respect with kindness all people, you have to get rid of some of these notions that some people are quasi Canadians. And I don't know whether you can teach somebody to be courageous, because that's what it takes. You see, Annabelle was able to stand up for us on the playground because Annabelle's mother was the only person on our street who did not sign the petition to block our purchasing that first home in North Vancouver. So she learned that from her mom. Her mom, who actually night as a nurse at North Van Hospital, North Van General, it was called then, and slept all day. Annabelle's mother didn't even play a big part in her life because as a nurse, she was either sleeping or working and not up for much of the day. And yet, in those things that she did, she modeled them.
Yeah, I think sometimes as individuals, we don't, especially when we're in those caregiving roles, like whatever it may be, parents, grandparents, teacher, the impact of what we do, how we say things, what we say, how we react. Like modeling is can be a really big transformative tool for how kids grow up to learn and see things and stuff. So thank you for sharing that. There was a your story that really stood out to me. You write about your experiences at these track meets, and you wrote, with the exception of Paul, Harry, and myself, this meet was an all-white affair. And I know we touched a little bit on this in the beginning, but reflecting on that, what was it like to be one of the only Black athletes in Canadian sport? And how did this shape you on and off the track?
Well, I have to say, it was the same as being in a classroom where everybody's white. It's the same as going to the store where everybody's white. So you don't expect sport to be any different. It's just part of how the whole world was. When you went to the movies, it was an all white experience in terms of what's on the screen. So I wouldn't necessarily say, holy man, we're the only blacks here at the national championships in 1959 in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It was just the rest of our lives. So it wasn't a matter of, holy, this is sport and it's not. In Major League Baseball, I remember my brother and my dad listening to the radio. We were living in Winnipeg at the time, to the first game that Jackie Robinson played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. There was somebody being the first black person stepping, and his own teammates were hating him and trying to step on him and beat him with the ball. So it wasn't that was a wholly experience. That's what athletics were everywhere. The NBA still had teams that were all white. The Lakers, I don't know who the teams were, but I know the Boston Celtics finally got Bill Russell, and his own teammates weren't even looking after him out on the floor. So ours was not the same as anyone joining a dance. Well, I don't know if there were any black dancers who weren't running their own companies and doing a form of dance that wasn't part of the classical genre of ballet. That was just life. It wasn't like, holy man, sport. No, sport everywhere was like that.
Yeah. So much, we talked a lot about sport. There's so much in what you're sharing that goes beyond sport and beyond competition. And,
That's
you
right.
know, that, the importance of allyship and belonging, and that, belonging wasn't always guaranteed as, you said earlier, it wasn't really something that even existed to you at that time, whether it was sport or school or society.
Or
And
the norms of society, always these hair shampoo commercials with this long straight hair, every ad that advertised anything, they weren't advertising to people like me who was going to have to straighten her hair in order to even get something even remotely close to that, which it never could be. So it was the world as we knew it. It was a white world. You didn't expect anything any different anywhere. And
yeah.
when you were embraced by people, you enjoyed it. And but there were people in my high school who went through school with me from grade 2 to grade 12 and never uttered a single word to me, not even when I made the Olympic team. I was that what was the norm. I didn't expect these people to invite me to their home. It was just
Hmm.
the norm.
Thinking back on these, experiences and the things that were the norm, what might help parents and caregivers support maybe a child they have in feeling like they belong? Because, a lot of these barriers still, these predominantly white spaces still exist in a lot of places.
Yeah, and I think that's up to the rest of us to go and help make those spaces open. I've done a lot of work in the dance community, and one of my dancers was at the Go Ballet. She was the only Black student there. She now dances for the Royal Ballet in Great Britain. And, I think that all of us can, no matter what color you are, and no matter how much courage you have to take anything on, but you can go and support people. I used to be a volunteer there, and I just loved being a volunteer. I loved the hard work that the dancers did, for one thing. But I do think that to find that space, many spaces are integrated, but it didn't mean that things have changed. I'll just tell you about a recent school talk I did, which was at Ridgeway Elementary School, the school I attended in 1951 when we didn't even get onto the grounds in 1951, that first day. We had to wait for 2 days for my dad to come home from his train trip and take us across the street. I was back at that school on September 18th of 2024. I finished my talk. And even though the school had a big sign, which is how I opened my talk with, everyone is welcome, it said, and it had the multicolored flag of the pride, and it also had a lot of indigenous artifacts in the foyer or the main entranceway of the school. I finished my talk, and I had the principal and the vice principal standing next to me, and these kids just mobbed me. We're still called niggers. One little boy said, I'm not on the soccer team because I'm indigenous. I mean, that's 70 years ago. So I said to the principal, hello, what's this? It's a tough school. That was the answer. So yes, there's still a lot of work to be done. And even though there were more of them, there must have been, 25 kids who were people of color. It didn't seem to be a major, it didn't look like the principal and the vice principal were falling over when they heard those words. I have to say I was shocked.
Yeah.
Because so many, when Harry married in 1964, it made a white woman. It made the front pages of the Vancouver Sun. And Sammy Davis Jr., an American singer, had also married a white woman that year. That was big news. And nowadays, lots of people, there are hundreds of interracial marriages. I just love it. I smile at people as I go down the street and they think, what's that old woman grinning about? But it's nice to see. I find it in many improved, but there's still so much work to be done.
Of course. Yeah.
And it still exists. And to be advocate, to show that kindness, it's hard for people, and people need to do it when they're with their children because it will model for them what they need to do, just as Annabelle's mom modeled for them what to do.
Yeah.
And I think modeling is the number one you can do as a parent. I don't want you to gush and carry on like you're some type of idiot that, let's slather all the love in the world all over everybody who's brown. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying behavior that you would like your children to take forward. I have to tell you, last week I attended a funeral of one of my former teaching colleagues, a woman I really loved, but also attending that funeral, a woman I haven't seen in 40 years because she moved away from our school. And as soon as I saw this woman, my back went up and I felt really uncomfortable. And that was because the very first day I met this woman, Diane, she came into my classroom as the school counselor. blonde, blue-eyed, perky little soul. And she rushed up to me as though I were a dog. And she rubbed my head as though I was some pet in a zoo in front of my class. She wouldn't have done that to a white person, I can assure you. And my hairdo was of no significance to anybody, unlike the hairdo of Princess Diana of Great Britain. All I'm saying is, people, don't be so friendly that you're going to insult and humiliate somebody.
Yeah.
Warm without being insulting.
Yeah.
I felt like a dog having my head rubbed in front of a grade 6 class. There's a barrier between being kind and polite and respectful and giving people dignity
Of course. Yeah.
and then treating them like a dog or some kind of animal. Yeah.
Thank you. You have lived such a life full of incredible achievements, personal challenges, and a lifetime of navigating systemic barriers. Looking back, what are you most proud of, and what do you hope that people take away today from your story, from this Mar Talk?
Well, I hope they understand the notion that, you can stop qualifying how Canadian some people are, that we're not just half Canadians. I'm very proud that I'm Black, but I'm a Canadian too. And I think letting go a lot, when you look at somebody else, you assume they're an immigrant, you assume they're from somewhere else. What I'd like people to do is consider the fact the person's family might have been here longer than you, particularly if they're Indigenous. They don't need to be a qualified Canadian. Canada's their word. Or for many Black people who are descendants of these slaves who fought on the side of the British in the 1776 War of Independence and were given land in Nova Scotia. So don't assume color means foreigner or other. The things that I've learned, or the things that I'm most proud of, number one, I'm proud of my son. He's a mixed race kiddo. He's not a kid, he's in his 50s. I had 3 incidents of late that I realized there are 3 births I had in my lifetime, other than the birth from my mother's womb in 1944. The first one is marching into the Olympic Stadium in Rome, Italy in 1960. I mean, I hadn't even heard of the Olympics until about 2 years before. I hadn't heard of the Pan American Games until the year that I made the team. So that to me looked like a kind of birth into a larger world, a world of athletes, a world of competition, and it opened up the world itself, the geography. Going to Rome, Italy was a big, big deal. So that's number one. 2, I gave it to my son. It made me a totally different person. It made me somebody who would lay down my life in an instant for another person. And then the third one is a birth, and that's when I launched my book in 2023, September 23rd. I had been a teacher for many years before. As you can tell, I talk a lot. So I was used to talking, but it gave me a chance to tell the world, this book, that Canada has a lot of shaping up to do. That was it opened, I've done 124th talk I've done. And I can't stop. I'm like the Ancient Mariner. I don't know whether you know Coleridge's poem where he grabs this guy who's trying to get in to watch his friend's wedding, but the Ancient Mariner grabs this man's wrist and will not let go. He is compelled to tell the story of the albatross and having shot the albatross. Anyway, I know I'm a bit off topic, but I'm just saying that that's the kind of birth my book gave to me when it was launched. I mean, I was in a room, Vancouver Art Gallery hosted me, and many, many of my friends were there, most of them who knew nothing about my early life other than the fact that I'd been an athlete and I'd been a Green Party candidate. But it was my chance to tell the world, doing these talks. It's given me another voice. I'm not in the classroom anymore, and I'm not at home being a mother teaching all this. I've got a whole lot of other people who need to hear, and I do think need to hear, who Canadians are. I did a talk very recently to a whole lot of adult people, and in the question and answer period, this woman stood up and she was crying, and she said, I lived in North Vancouver. It wasn't like that. There was no racism. Did she think I was lying? Well, she's a white woman. Why would she know about the racism? So I finally said, well, didn't you shop at Super Value Store where the nuts at Christmas time were almonds, filberts, walnuts, and nigger toes? Or didn't you ever hear your teacher sorting things out with eeny, meeny, miny? I mean, hello. But you see, she didn't consider that racism. So for me, this book, which has been this third birth in my life, has given me the opportunity to make people aware of who Canada is.
Thank you. For those of you that haven't had a chance to read the book, I highly recommend. It was absolutely wonderful and really, we talked about it in our last Smart Talk, just like the power that words can have in sharing stories. And while you're sharing your story, you might not never ever know what kind of impact your story had on someone else that read that book and was like, hearing something they can relate to, or learning something they didn't know. And so your book opened up a lot of doors for me and things that I hadn't considered. And yeah, it was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
would love to open just for some questions if anyone has any. Feel free to put them in the comments or unmute yourself. Michelle?
Hello, Valerie. Thank you so much for coming and doing this talk. I really, really appreciate it. I read your book. It was wonderful. It was very enlightening. I live in North Vancouver, and we swim at Harry Jerome Rec Center all the time. And I am curious. You mentioned the difference that coaches and just school teacher sponsors can make in children's lives, and as we all know, teachers aren't the best compensated, and all of that is done on volunteer time. And I'm just wondering what thoughts you have on how that can be better supported.
Well, I personally, this is my big hobby horse. Who gets into the Faculty of Education to become teachers? And, I had student teachers that were just so outrageous. They were so racist. It was shocking. And when I tried to fail them because I didn't think they belonged in a classroom that was with anybody, never mind children of color, I really think we don't value teachers enough, number one. But number two, I'd really like to see us screen. I mean, the computer models can do all kinds of things. They can find out all your deepest, darkest secrets. Surely they can come up with some type of program or test or something that can sort out some of these people. Teachers play a big role, and I think good ones and those who are the extracurricular really need to be valued. But, I've been retired now for 20 years, more than 20 years, so I'm very distant to what's happening now in terms of a lot of teachers now just want, I won't say it, but as I was leaving the profession, they just wanted to be gone by 3:15. So, their experience wasn't the same as mine. So everybody's different, but I don't know other than compensating and there's more. I think those are the only things I can respond to there.
Thank you.
There was, oh, thank you, Mona, for sharing that. Where you guys can buy the book. It's also linked in our Eventbrite. When you registered, there should be a link that takes you directly to Valerie's website, where I think Valerie's website takes you to where you can also purchase the book as well.
Well, it's at all Indigo stores.
Okay.
And Book Warehouse and their chain. It's most everywhere.
Jen is asking, encourage folks to purchase from local independent bookstores and inquire with your libraries too.
Yes, and the book is available in the libraries. There was at one time quite a list to wait for it, but I know it's readily available now. And yes, we have lots of independent bookstores that need to be supported and who have copies of the book. So I only say Indigo because it's like a half a block from, well, not half a block, it's 2 blocks from my house. And usually when people come to me and want one, I say, well, run up the street or go to Book Warehouse, which is independent over on West Broadway. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, does anyone have any final thoughts, questions, sharings, or anything like that? I'll just give it a minute. Michelle. Oh, yes. Yeah. I'm on it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I found this talk so insightful and I almost cried like 500 times because I just think as a person of color, it's true. Like, I think what you were saying about recognizing people of color and just everyone as Canadian and not making assumptions as to who belongs and who doesn't belong. I think that was something that really stuck with me. And I want to be a teacher too. So I feel like this whole talk was just inspiring. And I just wanted to say thank you before we hop off because it meant a lot. So I really enjoyed it. And I'm excited to read your book.
That's great. Hope you become a teacher.
I think so. Well, thank you so much, Valerie. I really appreciate it. And Actually, I'm on it, and I are good friends, and I was telling her how much I was looking forward to this. So thank you so much for being here, and I feel like we could just chat for hours. So thank
Probably
you.
we could.
I definitely could. So thank you everyone so much for joining. And if you're in Victoria, maybe go enjoy the sun. It's sunny
Sunny here
today.
too. It's
Oh,
bright.
great. It was pouring yesterday, so if you can enjoy a little bit of sunshine, maybe go do that before the rain. Cecilia says, just wanted to say thank you so much, Valerie, for your talk, your courage and resilience. I loved hearing from you today.
Well, thank you, all of you, and I apologize for being so incompetent at getting into the Zoom on time. It's not my strength. I'm not big on.
It can be tricky. I don't. If we could have everyone in person and chat, I would love that. I
That
would
would be
prefer
good.
that, but it's
This has
also
been very well. Well, thank you for having me.
well. Thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you, Chantel, for that comment. Chantel says thank you so much for sharing with us. So enjoy your Sunday, everyone. Thank you for joining.